want to talk about anything else.
We don't want to know.
We're dedicated, yes,
To our favorite shows.
Oh, my circuits!
Everybody loves Hippo Toes.
Scary dog!
Jensen and Blurnsville.
Futurama!
Good evening and welcome to TV Party Tonight here on the Radulich Broadcasting Network. I am your host, the mandated reporter, and frankly I'm mortified, Mr. Mark Radulich. And tonight, our favorite show, because we can't get enough wrestling on this network these days, is Glow Season 3, brought to you by the good people at Netflix and Genji Cohen. Joining me tonight from the WTM. Does W still stand for wrestling? We'll find out. Ladies and gentlemen, Sean Garmer. How you doing, sir?
Doing good. Technically, I guess it would, because there's no other letter to replace that with. But the WTM network is doing good, and always glad to have you as part of it.
I'm glad we haven't been able to get you on. We've crossed hairs and wires, and we've promised you a few times. We have scheduled it, the almighty schedule, but we've missed each other like ships in the night. So I'm glad we finally connected, and you're able to join us to talk about Glow.
Oh, for sure. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And making his second appearance this week, I'm sure this is exhausting for him. Simply exhausting. 2 shows with me in 1 week. He probably took a bevy of pills of all various colors and strengths. Ladies and gentlemen, he's Sean You're Not.
What the Smurfy blue fuck do you think I do to get ready for a podcast, Mark?
Second day in a row of dealing with me. That's the implication here. I am exhausting. I am stressing.
Look. My days of having to ingest various stimulants just to get myself up for a podcast, those are long since over.
Well,
Long gone. I will say this, though. Speaking of possible substance abuse, I implore you, all of our regular audience, please do not try to play the drinking game with this show. There is no winner if you do that. Leave that by the wayside this time. It ain't going anywhere. Trust me.
Sean, as I said before, yesterday did his Orange is the New Black Season 7 show with me, and I happened to have mentioned at that time that there was an angle they did with 2 characters, one of which was of Middle Eastern descent, and I told him, I'm like, wait till you see Glow Season 3, and my utter panic as I thought Genji Cohen was, like, word for word repeating herself. So I'm just we're gonna do, go through this, sequentially here, but I gotta ask, Sean, when they started dealing with the Indian girl, I guess, and the second junk chain, and they started to go down that path, did those words come back to you? Do you like, oh God, this is what Mark was talking about?
Okay, I'm sorry. Run that by me one more time. Did which words come back to haunt me?
So I remember I was telling you about from Orange is the New Black, Nichols and the Egyptian gal, and I thought they were repeating the exact same thing on Glow.
Oh dear God, I hadn't thought of it until just right now.
Yeah, I thankfully they veered into a different direction with that. It was a whole other kettle of fish, but I had to fan myself there for a moment. All right, Sean, Garmer, let me go over to you for a second. I think this might be the first time we've had you on to talk about Glow. If we've had you on before, I honestly don't remember. But what have you thought of the show up to this point? The first 2 seasons, solid, little shaky, just over the top nanners, as Sean would say. The other Sean, oh, this is going to confuse the fuck out of me tonight. Comer, we're in the army. We're doing last names. Damn it. So Garmer, what did you think of the first 2 seasons up to this point?
I love the first season. I think obviously. And this is from somebody that had watched that History of Glow thing. I knew some of the wrestlers, obviously, because they came into WWE from there. I think it was nice because if you go back and you look through it, they did follow sort of the story in a way and make it their own. Obviously, with Allison Brie and Betty Gilpin leading the way, doing a great job, and everybody else part of the cast. So it just was a perfect mesh. I think the second season, obviously, it was hard for it to like repeat that same feeling, but it was still good in its own way. They had to kind of deviate from that path and then sort of leaving that surprise at the end that leads you to what all of season 3 is about. I have never. I think it's the perfect choice for a 30-minute show that knows what it is. It has wrestling in it, which helps if you're a wrestling fan. Even if you're not a wrestling fan, I think your girlfriend, your wife, your significant other, your sister, mother, whatever, could watch. Maybe not. There's some parts maybe not you want to watch with your mother, but other than that, I think for the most part, it's something you could show somebody that's not a wrestling fan and they can enjoy it because it's funny in its own way, and it treats even though yes, it deals with stereotypes and stuff like that you dealt with back then, it still handles them well, and I think that's something that they carry into this season. Touching on that, I thought, are they ever going to get to that point where they say these are things, these are issues, we should talk about them, and that's good that they carried that on from those past 2 seasons and acknowledge it now into this season.
Comer, you and I talked about with the first 2 seasons that they kind of fit together as one story in the storied relationship of Ruth and Debbie. Season 1 kind of sets it up, it world builds, it kind of, it builds to the launching of Glow, but in the second season kind of deals with a lot of the aftermath of those two having been friends, then Ruth betraying Debbie, and Debbie having hard feelings for her, and then now they have to work together, but it all kind of bubbled up into Debbie injuring Ruth, and then the sort of the fallout from that. So they wrap things up pretty neatly at the end of season 2, to where if the series had ended, I think you got a full cohesive story. And then they dropped the bomb that they were going to Vegas. Vegas, baby, 3rd season. What did you think of, 1, the idea of moving the show to Vegas? 2, what were your expectations going into season 3?
I can't really say what my expectations were because I really had... I had some idea of what I wanted to see them tackle, but I had no idea how they were going to really deal with it in some senses. We saw the little flickering the first flickers of some romantic type tension between Ruth and Sam. I kind of knew they were going to come back around to that. And yeah, sure enough, they did. You could see Debbie starting to fall apart at the seams. That was a key element. There was obviously a lot more focus on Bash. I was expecting to see more of how this troupe of actors and misfits turned wrestlers was going to start to really gel into a family, a true sisterhood, like the kind that we've heard described in the territory days of professional wrestling. I think we were kind of hoping that was going to sort of coalesce. And of course, a change of scenery is going to mean new challenges, new environmental factors that are going to be taken into account, and obviously that's exactly what happens. And I sometimes don't think it's so much... How can I put this? I don't know. I think you almost could have left it in LA and accomplished the same thing at times, because so much of the season, so much of what they spend developing, you could have done against any backdrop. Although I do think Vegas certainly freshens it up.
One of the big changes I thought in the way the show was approached this season was really shift, now that they've wrapped up the Ruth Debbie stuff fairly well. The show doesn't necessarily focus on them as much. They're certainly still leads and they play a big part. But I feel like this made the transition, like many other shows before it, into focusing more on the ensemble. All right, get out your Radulich and Broadcasting bingo cards because I'm going to make a Wire reference. But after about the first one or two seasons of The Wire, the show became less about McNulty and more about Baltimore and whatever part of Baltimore they happened to have been focusing on. They were focusing on other characters, other storylines, and McNulty was part of the fabric. Christ, I think in 4, he's barely even in it. Season 4, where they focused on the schools. So, we're not quite Season 4 Wire yet with Glow, but Glow definitely starts to make that transition to giving the other characters more, to the point where I kind of want to push Ruth and Debbie to the side for just a minute and focus on some of the, what I thought were the more interesting storylines of this, some of the breakout characters and performances. Probably my favorite one this season, I want to see what you guys think of it, is, where'd you go? Gail Rankin as Sheila the She-Wolf, who in the first 2 seasons was kind of an offbeat comedic character. She's there for kind of punchlines, whatever. In this one, the actress herself and the character really step up and shine, I thought, this season. So the evolution of her realizing that this identity of being a she-wolf was holding her back, and she sort of blossoms out of that, and she decides, I want to be an actress, and I want to do other things, and I don't want to be this one thing for the rest of my life. She sort of encompasses the idea of evolution in a personality, in growth in a human being. And I don't know what else Gail Rankin has done. I got to click on her wiki real quick to figure it out. But I thought she was amazing, and she was probably for me at least, the best part of the season. What did you think of the Sheila stuff, Garmer?
I thought it was great. I think that was probably one of my sort of favorite characters that I was like, well, she's not getting a lot because, like you said, she was sort of that offbeat comedic character they went to when they needed some kind of reference or some weird thing that it'd be funny if she did it. I think when you finally hit that moment of her deciding, okay, we've gotten little bits and pieces, and she finally just blossoms and says, okay, here we are. This is my new character, embraces it, and it's great. And I think it was the funniest part of that entire thing where they changed gimmicks. It made you, like you said, just she evolved from a different person, and now you want to see where she goes from there. And you could certainly say that for a lot of the other characters in this season.
Yeah, I would say, a fair amount of time, again, was spent with your 3 leads, but I think everybody was pretty much given more, especially in the episode after the Bash drops the bomb that they're staying for an entire year and they all go camping, where Ruth and Debbie, they had their little interaction while they were lost out, in the mountain there, but you had the interactions between Melrose and I can't remember the Asian gal's name, Fortune Cookie. You had their interactions, and that was pretty heavy stuff for a 30-minute comedy show on Netflix. Sean, what did you think of some of the more ensemble pieces of this season? And like I said, my personal favorite standout was the Sheila stuff. What stood out for you as part of the ensemble?
Okay, so when you say ensemble, you're talking about the supporting cast other than Ruth and Debbie and
Correct.
Sam and Bash, right?
Yes.
Okay, well, the one that I have got to point out, because she has been such an utter treat to watch all season, is Kia Stevens.
Yes.
Oh my God! And this was something that I actually tagged her in when I made this remark on Twitter not too long ago. Even as much as a fan as I've been of her in-ring work, I still sorely underestimated exactly what she was capable of in terms of performance of any kind. She truly brings this character to life, and she does it in a way that authentically portrays so many of the dirty, tragic little truths of the wrestling business in a way that only a veteran of it can. The one you asked what stood out to me most, and you'll have to help me out. I'm forgetting which exact episode it was that opened with this. So if you happen to remember it, by all means, chime in. The one that starts with the Groundhog Day style progressive montage of her routine of waking up in pain, having to limp her way to the shower for some heat therapy, something I'm very familiar with because my significant other has a 13-year-old back injury that has often, for as long as I've known her, required to stand under a scalding hot shower just to loosen it up. And then from there, it's wine, it's over-the-counter pain meds, which starts off with her just popping a quick 2. She gets in the ring, takes her bump, comes back the next day, limping a little harder, got to take a little bit bigger dose, got to drink a little more wine. The shower isn't quite working like it should, and that roll into the ring just gets slower and slower and slower. And you think about how many different legends of those so-called good old days, how many of their stories that kind of backs up and embodies. I remember Jim Cornette once talking about what he really thought of Darren Aronofsky's The Wrestler. And he talked about how he didn't like it, but not for the reason one would sometimes expect from Corny. He didn't like it seemingly because it hit a little too close to home for him. He tends to like movies and entertainment that are escapism, and for him, that was bringing him right back to the ugly truth of his world. And Mark, you and I have been fans for going on probably about going up close to 30 years now
of wrestling. Yeah, probably since I'm 5 years old.
Yeah, man, and I mean, how many stories from guys that we followed and cheered for have we heard where they later talked about what they had to do just to get from one house show to the next, to the TV taping, to the pay-per-view. And it just kind of left us kind of aghast and even a little bit guilty at what we were cheering for.
Two things. One, the episode you're referring to is Freaky Tuesday, where her back gets so bad they switch characters. Two,
I'll get to I'll more on that episode in a second, but by all means, go ahead.
Two, have you ever seen the Jake Roberts WWE
Pick Your Poison? Oh, yeah, God, yes.
It's either that or Beyond the Mat, where he's talking about the road. Now, he's specifically talking about how you fall into sort of the never-ending circular pit of women on the road and how it never becomes enough. But you could definitely
it was both.
That was Beyond the Mat, I think. For sure.
Okay, but it's that sort of thing of just being on the road, talking about being on the road and how worse things get for guys, just to make it through. And boy, his story he was not alone in sharing that point of view, but that's Jake Roberts is the one guy I remember when I think about the conditions of the road.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think he and Scott Hall are probably the first two that come to anybody's mind. Mm-hmm. But you mentioned Freaky Tuesday, and as long as we're talking about ensemble pieces, you want to talk about an episode that dynamically both moves arcs forward and creates whole new ones without ever really feeling bloated. It all kind of happens so neatly. That, to me, just might be the best episode of the season, because you have that moment where, and forgive me, I have trouble remembering some of the actual ladies' characters' true birth names, so I'll be referring to just some of them by their characters. Machu Picchu is having that quick little sit down with her brother, played by Carlito Colon. And Carlito is kind of expressing his disdain and his frustration for what she's limiting herself to, because it is just the same match every single night, night after night. And to him, it's a slap in the face. It's a patronization to the art that he's kind of championed his whole life, and he believes that his sister's better than that and wants to see her be better than that. And so when you see them really throw it out the window and really get creative and really call everything on the fly, that to me is a kind of magical moment when this goes from a troupe of failed or struggling actors who are kind of making the best of it, playing at being professional wrestlers, to women who truly get it, who truly kind of join the brotherhood, or the brotherhood, sisterhood, whatever, the family. And they kind of arrive and show that they can truly do this. And it was in the same episode wherein Sheila has that absolutely magical moment with the Barbra Streisand impersonator.
Liza Minnelli.
Yeah. And she feels a need to break out, to quit limiting herself. It was something that was really started with the bit in the acting class. Mm-hmm. The one that she quit because the teacher just couldn't get past her look. Which, again, yet another thing that, hey, if ever there was a tale as old as time in professional wrestling, there you have it. And it's a moment where she evolves beyond the she-wolf. She truly becomes something else. And even Bash kind of furthers his heel turn a little bit, because we finally can't ignore that, again, another professional wrestling backstage trope. He's the entertainment exec who's just having fun toying with a wrestling company. He is Bill Hurd. He is an early days Eric Bischoff. He's a guy who just doesn't get it, and so he doesn't understand what is kind of organically taking shape right in front of him. And I'm going to go ahead and get to this one because I'm starting to get into one of my famous rants here. If I got to nail it down to just one more, I would go with Outward Bound. I do think that there are a lot of happy endings that feel more than a little bit forced there. But it was a good way to freshen things up by getting them out of the Fantan, getting them out of Vegas for a while, and kind of forcing some of these conclusions so that they could move on. Was it a bit heavy-handed in places? Yes. Yes, it was. But it was a needed change of pace to kind of give everybody a little room to breathe. If we were talking about a pay-per-view match like on WrestleMania, it would be like watching WrestleMania 23, and this is Melina versus Ashley Massaro.
So one of the big, yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's a moment to catch your breath because, hey, after this, home stretch of the season is coming up, and that's going to be your Cena Michaels. So if you got to piss, you got to grab a snack, you got to just take a nice long breath after everything else. By all means, this is the episode where you do it.
One of the big themes of this season, and it dealt with it in big and small ways. Offline, some of the people I have, open, ongoing chats with, it produced a lot of big eye rolls, just because I think because of what's going on in the larger social communities, social spheres. But I think their reactions are a little unfair. I think to a larger audience, to other people watching the show, I think these were things that need to be talked about, need to be fleshed out. Maybe if you're like me and you watch Glow right on top of Orange is the New Black, it might have seemed a bit overwhelming. But all in all, I thought it was handled well. I want to get your opinion on this, Garmer. there was a lot of sexuality, gender fluidity. You had the relationship between, again, the Indian gal who plays like the Pakistani bomber or whatever it is she does, and Junk Chain number 2. And so, you know, with them, you're dealing with the idea of coming out and it being, now mind you, this is the 80s.
Right.
You know, this is when we think AIDS is quote unquote the gay disease and that sort of thing.
Right.
And so there's a lot going on in the owning your sexuality and coming out or not, and is it safe to, that's talked about between those two characters. You had the issue with Bobby, who plays the drag singer, and he has some professional stuff going on. He represents some of the gender fluidity stuff going on, and then and this got a major complaint from somebody who I'm friendly with, who just saw the episode and went, "That's it," and threw his hands in the air, which I think is Christopher Miller worth talking about. You had the big sort of seesaw thing where you have the fundraiser, which is this big celebration of gender fluidity, and then it is met with violence, where someone like starts a fire and they like dye fags or whatever on the street, and you know there's this, and it produces some other moments here. But as a viewer, how did you feel about so much of that being in just this 10-episode, 30-minute per episode series? And how do you think they did with it? Do you think it was too heavy-handed? Do you think it was just right? Tell me, Goldilocks, what did you think of this porridge?
I think that goes along with them deciding that this is going to be a season of getting to know these characters more. I think that goes with their theme, and they handled that well. I mean, you can complain. I think a lot of the complaints that I saw is people were complaining that there wasn't enough wrestling and that it deviated too much or whatever, that they didn't want this in the Glow show or whatever. And I get it. You know, this is also probably a lot of wrestling fans saying this, that they don't want that stuff. They just want to focus on. And it's like when you go to Vegas and they're doing the same show every night, what are you going to really cover? They got to do other things. So I think for what they did, I mean, the Ruth and Sam stuff and the directors, the boyfriend and director stuff, that's something I think they had to go back to, and I think they resolved that well. The Junk Chain and Indian Girl stuff I thought was handled well for being the 80s. They didn't try to modernize it. They didn't try to make this, let's put a 1980s spin on 2019. I thought for what, keeping it in that capsule that it's in, they did a good job there. And, I thought the drag guy was actually pretty funny, and he added to the whole She-Wolf being able to break out, so he added an extra layer to another character, aside from obviously creating some doubts with Bash and all that stuff, which was another theme in that season, causing the whole marriage for the green card to kind of get messed up in a way, and then of course adding the mom to the mix too, which was I think added its own comedy. For the most part, if you have it, I can see where some people might have a problem with it if that's just not you didn't want them to go down this road too much. But I thought for the most part, all of that was handled well, and what it did was, now I feel like I know these characters more, and I feel like you said, I think at the beginning, Mark, now I kind of want to know where they all go from here, because before it really was, oh, this is just a Ruth and Debbie show and everybody else is here for the ride. Now you feel like I could watch any of these characters in their own show, and it might actually be pretty good.
Yeah, I'm super interested in a lot more of these characters now, which is a far cry from where we were with season 1. Sean, I'm going to play devil's advocate here. I want to be clear, this is not my personal opinion. But there are people who feel like, just in general, in media in general, that the gender fluidity issue, homosexuality, specifically, overrepresented when run up against the population at large. There's just so much of it on TV, is what they say. that when you get to a show like this, and it's just you just feel like you're drowning in it. First, what did you think of how it was represented in this season, and then what do you think about that idea? Personally, do you feel like those people have kind of a bone to pick with Hollywood, or they are a little on the too sensitive side?
Okay. We're hitting kind of close to home here, but you know what? That's okay, because it's something that I kind of feel needs to be said, and I kind of know which individuals have voiced their opinions, and yeah, I think it's time that someone kind of finally said otherwise. And while I'm not going to attack their opinions, they are what they are. The fact is, I see it a little bit differently, because, to put this out there, I am a member of an LGBTQ household. My girlfriend is bi. Her daughter, my future stepdaughter, is pan and identifies as non-binary. And frankly, I just kind of recently came out as being heteroflexible myself. And in fact, we're also in a poly relationship. So that, and the experience of a lot of my other friends in the LGBTQ community, as I've kind of gotten to know them and their struggles over the years, have given me kind of that Tony Stark in Afghanistan kind of moment.
Okay.
It's funny to you, but it's the best way I can kind of describe in a pop culture sense a moment of clarity like that. And so the thing you have to understand about that is there's this teenager that I'm helping to raise who gets shit of her own all the time from her peers. In her she was in junior high last year, just started high school yesterday. And she does get a ton of shit for not being strictly cisgender and hetero, including from a certain family member who felt the need to say to her, "It would be easier for me if you were simply a lesbian." She's been mistakenly called that by her classmates. She's gotten grief because when she realized she identified as non-binary, and decided to start going by a different name. I shouldn't even be seeing the pronouns are admittedly kind of confusing. It kind of weirds my sense of language when they realized that they got a great deal of grief during freshman orientation. And I want you to take all that into consideration and then imagine the way that her eyes light up, and they do, anytime she sees someone wearing a pride pin or a pride flag on something, or anytime we're watching something, whether it's an anime or a live action drama or anything else, something that normalizes something other than cisgender heterosexuality. It gives her something that she can identify with openly, comfortably. It's part of a sense of community for her. And I don't apologize whatsoever to anybody who feels bothered by seeing that depicted on any show. Because the fact of the matter is, when I think back to the way that homosexuality and being transgender were depicted on shows when you and I were growing up. Granted, I know it was a different time. I get it. You can't judge everything relatively. But the fact is, you watch it now, and you can't ignore it kind of bullshit like how one of the very first storylines on Friends was, it made the not so subtle dig that what made it so much worse that Ross's wife dumped him was that she dumped him for another woman. Somehow that seemingly was supposed to make it worse. Like, what? How? Back then, if a character was revealed to be trans or happened to be a drag queen or something like that, it was treated with this awkwardness that almost bordered on horror, and this implication that somehow if somebody was revealed that they like to wear women's clothing, that all of a sudden every other hetero male on the show would all of a sudden be terrified of them, and there would be no kind of moment of justice where those people kind of had that thrown back in their face. It was just still treated like a joke butt. It was still treated as something that somebody should be embarrassed about rather than just who they are. If somebody, and as far as being trans, if somebody was shown to be trans, it's that moment from Ace Ventura: Pet Detective that we all laughed so hard at. When it's revealed that Einhorn is Finkel because, oh, look, a penis. They're treated as these almost kind of predatory abominations that could be lurking around every corner. And whereas nowadays we get a revival of Rocko's Modern Life on Nickelodeon, and if we're truly going to have our animation kind of somewhat reflect an actual situation, I was damn proud of the fact that Roy Bighead steps out of his ice cream truck after telling Rocco and Filbert and Hef, guys, I've changed over the years. I am not Roy anymore, I'm Rachel. And there's a pause where before you would have probably expected all three of them to maybe back away slowly or just kind of exchange concerned glances, and instead they just pipe up with, wow, that's so cool. They're happy for him. One of my favorite sci-fi shows of a number of years, and one that I think carries kind of this flag proudly forward from the ground that Buffy sort of broke back when I was in junior high and high school, was the fact that you have a show where same-sex and bisexual and open and pansexual relationships, they were all just treated as just normal love, normal romance, normal lust. So if it seems unfair to certain people that this is being depicted openly, that a point is being made to normalize this, sorry, I'm not even remotely sorry that you feel that way. Not even the least little bit. Because you've had years of these people being your joke butt, of having to watch what was offered on primetime on primetime and cable TV and see the same tropes over and over and over again. And like I said, you've got the straight characters constantly being afraid that the gay characters are going to hit on them, or that they might turn them gay. You know, after a while, it kind of quits being funny. It's like, yeah, once there's an awkward laugh, and there's a ha ha ha. Okay, good one. I get where you're going with this. And you kind of, and sometimes even when they would try to kind of force it down with a sort of message of tolerance, even that got kind of old, because it becomes a matter of, okay, instead of us being kind of fetishized by the rest of the world, instead of us kind of being your vehicle by which you deliver a message, why can't we just be normal characters? Why can't we just have relationships and sexual identities that don't have to be lampshaded? So it's a case where quite frankly, I'm fine with the way they depicted the Indian girl on Junk Chain's relationship and her kind of struggling to identify just kind of what she really is, so to speak, because I have been there. I have been through that. I've been through it recently, thanks. Likely my future stepdaughter, still going through it. My girlfriend, she's been through it. So, no, I'm not going to express any qualms about that, because it was a thing then. You know, the whole idea of gender identity and something other than heterosexuality, it's not new. It's always been there. It's just that people don't feel like they have to be as afraid about putting it out there anymore. And to a certain extent, there is a need to acknowledge that was where we once were before we came to where we are now, where there's still a lot of progress that needs to be made. But we're a shit ton further than where we were in the mid-'80s.
Yeah, I'm not going to cry about representation on TV. To me, I know you're not, but without even having heard the comments that you're talking about, I got a pretty good guess who it was. Yeah, but I mean, those opinions are representative of a segment. It isn't like they're outliers. If they said it, I can imagine this was shared by at least a fairly decent percentage of people who watch the show. I mean, for Christ's sake, Sean said not that long ago, there were people who watch this. I was like, why isn't there more wrestling? I'm going to guess one or two of them felt that way too. So,
there was something else that was said on Twitter, and I think it holds up pretty well in this argument. Mm-hmm. Somebody was posting about this the other day, making the satirical remark. I believe it was in regards to, in their case, comics in particular, mm-hmm. But once you hear it, let's fucking face it, you'll realize you've heard this for every medium we've covered under this show. And it was, why do they have to make character X gay? Why can't they just make an original character and have their own? Okay, I'll turn this around and ask you a question. What is it about that character that their sexuality is so important to you? Why is that such a make or break for you? What does that change about anything else that character stands for, just because of who they go to bed with? Why does that matter? Why is that such a big deal that all of a sudden I'm a very vocal member of the Overwatch community. Fuck's sake. I've heard this now with 2 characters. When Tracer and Soldier 76 were both outed, all of a sudden it's like just because Tracer has a girlfriend and they revealed that Soldier once had a boyfriend and the relationship didn't work out. You would think the people who had invested hundreds of hours into playing those characters had all of a sudden logged into one day and found that just because of that lore, magically, all of their stats had been nerfed. Like, all of a sudden, they'd become actually worthless to play in the game just because a character decision was made. Heaven for fucking bid, out of more than 30 characters, 2 of them are gay. Fuck's sake.
So, what I wanted to quick say, and then just to round this conversation back to where we started, and then we're going to take a quick pause for the cause. I'm always in favor of do what's in the best service of the story or the character's personal development. And I'm actually going to use her name now since I keep saying, Sunita Amani, who plays Arthi Beirut, the Mad Bomber, Prem Kumar. Okay, that's her. She has a really nice arc in this. She starts out as somebody who is afraid to confront and admit her sexuality, even though she's clearly living that life, but she's living it somewhat in secret, to somebody who, in the face of bigotry and violence and all of that, is, becomes brave enough to say out loud that she's gay. And, of course, the other characters react great to it. They're like, yeah, we know. She was like, yes, but I needed to hear myself say it. See, writing 101 here, folks. We set something up in the beginning, we pay it off at the end. And so I think the larger issues at play during these 10 episodes definitely played into that and made it very effective. So in that particular circumstance, I had no problem with it. I had no problem. I don't believe the show overrepresented the community in any way. I think all of that stuff was in service to the themes and the character development, which is what you want in a show like this. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about a new character on the show, Sandy Devereaux as Gina Davis, as Sandy Devereaux St. Clair, who runs the Fantan. And yes, my loves, we will talk about Ruth and Debbie because we got to. We got to, ladies and gentlemen. We absolutely have to. But first, a word about Podcoin. Hey, everybody. I really do hope you love the Radulich Broadcasting Network. Did you know that you can actually get paid just for listening to this podcast? I know it sounds insane, but it's true. We just discovered this free new app called Podcoin, and it literally pays you to listen to podcasts. Here's how it works. You listen to podcasts, and you earn Podcoin while you listen. Then you turn that Podcoin in for gift cards at places like Amazon or Starbucks, or if you're a good person, you could even donate that Podcoin to charity. The more you listen, the more you earn. Here's what you do. Download the app right now on iPhone or Android, and I have a special code for you. Simply use our code MARKWED5. That's capital MARKWED 5. Capital MARKWED 5. MARKWED 5. And you'll get 300 Podcoin just for signing up. And if you listen to enough of us on there, you can get a cappuccino at Starbucks or an Amazon gift card on us. So go ahead and go listen to this podcast or virtually any podcast on Podcoin and sign up with code MARKWED5. I swear it'll change the way you listen to podcasts. So before we get to Ruth, Debbie, and Sam, who have their own connected and varied storylines throughout these 10 episodes, I just want to talk a little bit about Gina Davis. Gina Davis, as I said before, is a character, Sandy Devereaux St. Clair. She's a former showgirl who's now running the Fantan. And they kind of set her up as somewhat, I don't know if villain is too strong a word, a bit of an antagonist in the beginning. She becomes more sympathetic, I think, as the season evolves and rolls out. To the point where at the end, after and you know what, we should probably talk about a little more extensively about Bash and Britannica, but you know, once she's trying to keep this casino afloat. She's trying to keep Rhapsody, which is a show at the casino, going, and apparently it's seeing some hard times. So that being said, she gets involved with Bash, and Bash initially puts money into Rhapsody and then wants to turn it into like a BMX thing, and then pulls his money out because they're going to do something else. And she's sort of left holding the bag with her show in tatters. And, you know, I don't know. Kind of mixed feelings about the character. Gina Davis, always a strong performer. Always liked her as an actress. Sean's still on mute, Sean Garmer. So let me kick it over to you. Sean, just kind of hit me up on Messenger when you're ready to go here. But just a quick word. What did you think of Gina Davis this season, Sean Comer?
You know, I hadn't seen Gina in anything in quite some time. In fact, when I recognized her, I had to really try to think of what the last thing was that I had seen her in, and I still drew a bit of a blank. And that's not a knock on her. She's always been a joy to watch when I've seen her in almost anything. But I felt that what she brought to the table was a nice addition that kind of made the most of her fairly limited minutes. She wasn't really an over-the-top character. She was. You see her the first time, and you kind of expect that maybe she's gonna be playing some kind of conniving gold digger along the lines of the owner of the Cleveland Indians in Major League.
Sorry, I giggle because every time that movie gets brought up, I just think of the her with the stickers and everything. Just,
of course,
funny.
Of course. But as she kind of unfolds, you really find this genuine human being, somebody who perhaps who's been a little rough around the edges, who's very honest about everything that Vegas embodies. It is what it is, but not really a taskmaster. Somebody who's just a businesswoman who wants what's best for everybody. It's hard, not impossible, to dislike her, especially when you see how honest she is about the fact that when the old man passes away, she's able to admit that he was a creep, he was a lech, he was a perv, he was more than a little bit sleazy, but he was still a father figure. He was still somebody who showed her how to make her way in kind of a tough town, and that was something that was extremely endearing. When they could have gone in a very stock direction and pretty much made her just kind of a distaff Sam or Bash. So, I mean, not somebody that I'm going to look at and probably necessarily think to myself, oh, God, I could do with a whole show about her and her story. But still, somebody that I really enjoyed, and I tip my hat to Gina Davis for taking what could have been a really pretty small part and making the most of it by making her over into an actual human being.
Yeah, I thought she was a good addition to the cast. I enjoyed her scenes with Bash and the other cast members. I especially enjoyed when they did the fundraiser and she came out there as the showgirl. I thought that was a lot of fun. Mm-hmm. It was a lot of fun to see Gina Davis sort of embrace that role and take on the showgirl look and all of that, and just sort of be like, hey, I'm up there in age, but that's okay. I can still be me and be free, and all of what that represented.
Absolutely.
So that was a lot of fun. Let's keep rolling on here. I'm not sure if we lost Mr. Garmer or not. When I see him in my chat,
I'm here.
Oh, you are. Woo! I saw the microphone muted. I wasn't sure if we lost you or not. Sean, your thoughts on Gina Davis and what all she brought to this season?
Well, I was trying to eat dinner at the same time, so I didn't want chewing while y'all were talking. So, you know what? Gina Davis, I thought was a great addition to the cast. I thought she added a lot helped add get that progression of a female owner or important figure for them while they're in Vegas. Someone they have to not necessarily like kowtow to. They're trying to impress her, but she's necessarily not the typical owner type too. I love the Bash is freaking out the entire time when they switch roles, and she's just loving it there, and not what you expect at all. And she just totally takes it while she's also still mourning, the loss of an important figure in her life. And I thought they did that well for the entire part. And I'm a person that usually likes Gina Davis and most things she does, so seeing her pop up here was kind of cool, and I thought added to the show.
Let's stay with you for. No, go ahead, Sean.
I was going to say again. I just think it's nice that they didn't feel. And this is something that professional wrestling in real life has had a serious problem with for a bit. That to borrow that old line from the Incredibles, if everybody's super, then nobody will be. Well, the same goes if you make everybody an asshole.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, it doesn't become special anymore. It doesn't stand out. It doesn't feel as much like it's serving a purpose. You can't have every authority figure on this show be a predatory, opportunistic dirtbag.
Right, and that's what I'm saying. They kind of she was presented as sort of a mixed bag, and then at the end she's actually sympathetic, like I said before, which I thought was a nice change from how they normally would do this sort of thing. Just rolling along here, I want to keep with Garmer and talk a little bit about Bash and Britannica, because they had an interesting storyline this season. Of course, she marries him for a green card, and she admittedly says she didn't love him in the beginning. And just as an aside, this all but pisses off and again gets paid off at the end of the season. Brittany Young's character, who is Machu Picchu, good old Carmen, who, just as an aside, because I don't know if we're going to get to this at some point, I wanted to talk about A Christmas Carol in a little bit more, but if it doesn't get said, I'll kick myself, so I'm saying it now. Dude, Carmen plays a great Undertaker. At this point, Carmen plays a better Undertaker than Undertaker. And other than just the way they... just... Hang on one second. Sorry, we had a bit of technical difficulties there, but we're talking about Bash and Britannica. And so, as I was saying, sorry if I'm repeating myself in short order, So Britannica married him for the green card. She admittedly says she didn't love him in the beginning, but she kind of comes to love him. He, on the other hand, he's got some mental issues, as we'll see throughout the season. And someone was saying, are you necessarily equating mental issues with the gender, with the sexuality issues? Not necessarily. I think that's part of it, and I think it's him struggling with that part of his identity that he may or may not have known was there. But he admittedly says that he's always had someone caring for him and sort of addressing his every whim, and that person's gone now. And he doesn't know how to take care of people, which is a thing. I have certainly seen other people struggle with this. So there's that bit in the episode where Britannica has migraines, and he's like, I don't know what to do. He's in earnest trying to do for her what he thinks is best by removing himself from the situation. She's like, no, I just want you to sit here. And boy, have I been there before, where you're just sitting with a person and you're like, I want to be here, but I don't want to be here because I don't know what to do with myself. I have all this energy, and it's something that's very real. And that's one of the things about this season of Glow is I felt that there were a lot of very real moments. Later on in the season, you had the bit with Bash and his mom and Britannica and the mom in the same episode, and sort of her sort of feeling her out. And we're like, what's your angle here? And at the end of it, she says to her, hey, don't let him lose interest, which leads into all this other sexuality stuff. So I really enjoy... I didn't really like Bash as much as a character. I thought like the thing that he added to the show was he kind of speaks for the wrestling fan, and especially in the first season when he's trying to get Sam to understand that this isn't a Roger Corman movie. This is wrestling, and there's a difference, believe it or not. But this, I thought they really fleshed him out as a character and not just a super fan with money. And they did some interesting things with him. May have put people off. I don't know. But I rather enjoyed it. What did you think of the Bash Britannica storyline, Sean?
You summed it up pretty well. This is one time I'm not really sure how much I have to add. I've been where Bash is, so that was certainly relatable. Especially in that, you know, in the past I've been the boyfriend who was kind of trying so hard to look for just the right thing to say, the right magic combination of words, that I was missing the fact that I was making a situation kind of all about me and trying to be the hero, sort of trying to be the knight in shining armor, rather than just being what was really needed, and that was just there. Just quiet, but reassuringly there. That's very much a thing. And yeah, it's kind of easy sometimes, I think, to write off a character like Bash as basically resentfully, spitefully, whatever, saying, "Oh, poor little rich boy. You've got to figure out how to make it on your own when you've had everything handed to you." From experience in other relationships I've had, that is something that can be kind of tragic. That is something that can royally fuck somebody up from the ground up when it goes too far, when you've always had somebody there to bail you out, and you haven't experienced the world as it is and not just as how you're told it should be. And that's kind of how it is with him. And that's kind of how it is with him through the length and breadth of the show. In many ways, he's not so much a man running a wrestling company sometimes as a kid playing with his WWF action figures. You know, yeah. He has about all the awareness of what's going on around him, of, you know, Jesse Starcher's sons and some of the photos that he puts up on his Facebook when they're crafting their storylines with their little plastic figurines. You know, we could effectively take little Colton and give him an entire run of action figures, and he would be kind of running his own little imaginary fed about the way Bash runs Glow. And it's even to the extent that when someone swoops in and has their own ideas, and they want to turn to make John Cena and Big Show and Roman Reigns do stuff, he just wants to pack them all up and go home. He can't deal with not being in control, with not getting his own way. And it may sound obvious, but that's a pretty crushing realization when you're talking with somebody that has to come to grips with someone that he loved and depended on kind of all of a sudden just no longer being there. And also the idea that he may not have, as you pointed out, the whole notion that possibly maybe he might not have quite as firm a grip on his sexual identity as he thought he did. And, that everything he might know about that could be wrong. That's a yikes. Phone's going off. We talk later, Jer. Sorry about that. And it's kind of heartbreaking sometimes to see Britannica kind of caught in the middle of it, especially when it comes to how what he's doing is obviously being so toxic to the Glow sisterhood. And they all recognize that Bash is at the root of it. And yet...
It did put Britannica in an interesting spot, because she's sympathetic to the other ladies and how they feel about Bash, but that's also her husband, and she sees the other side of it. And so she's sort of pulled in two directions. I really thought they did a lot of interesting stuff with her this season.
They did. They gave her... That's what I'm looking for. Not necessarily personality. Help me out here, Mark. I'm at a loss. What's really the word, in your opinion, for the course she kind of evolved along?
They gave the character, I thought, gravitas. They made her something other than...
Yes.
Just sort of this caricature that she had been for the first two seasons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, gravitas. I think that really is exactly what I was looking for. Thank you. That is the word. And it was nice because in the first couple seasons, I really didn't feel all that particularly invested in her. A lot of times, I mean, she was there. She was there and doing stuff, but it's another one of those characters that I kind of felt it sometimes about her, about the way I felt about Daya, in that for some reason I wasn't investing in her.
Yeah. Let's switch gears here. Let's talk about our main three characters, and I kind of want to compartmentalize this because, again, some of their stories mingle, some of them are separate, and I think they all deserve at least a degree of conversation. I want to start with Sam, and just sort of specifically, because him and Ruth is a whole other kettle of fish. But I think Sam kind of goes through this really interesting arc of... he starts where he always starts in this show, which is I'm in charge, and I'm the great Hollywood sage who knows about storytelling, and he's very insecure, and he doesn't want notes except notes that tell him he did good, and then he starts to feel displaced and useless, and then and unloved, which bleeds into the Ruth thing. And then his daughter comes back into his life, and suddenly he has purpose. Oh, and then he has a heart attack. So now he's dealing with his mortality and his legacy. And, and Sam is such a shitty character, in the sense that his personality is shitty. He's not written badly or anything. He's fine. I actually rather enjoy Sam, especially this season, because they humanized him more. For the, they dented his armor a little in the first two seasons, but this one you really saw his bare skin. And all that he is dealing with inside, especially with the stuff with Ruth. But as he moved into more of the stuff with Justine, and and him handling the Hollywood system, and then being a part of making this movie, and then of course, almost promising Ruth would get a part, only to not have to take it away because the studio didn't want her, and neither did Justine. I really thought that for the first time in 3 seasons, Sam was likable, but not in the ironic sense from the first 2 seasons where he's likable because he's so shitty that it kind of cracks you up. That he's actually a sympathetic character, what did you, just kind of sticking strictly with the Sam-centered stuff, leaving Ruth out of it for a minute, what did you think of the Sam storylines?
You know what? I think it embodies something about Mark Maron that so often we say it in a tongue-in-cheek way as a negative, that so-and-so is only great at really one type of part because they're basically just playing themselves. The thing about Mark Maron, though, and I say this as both a fan of his IFC show where he plays a fictionalized but semi-autobiographical version of himself, and his work on Glow here and his stand-up, is the fact that he is great at playing a man who is looking for something that will categorically prove to him that life is worth living. That it's not just a spiral that he's tolerating. And ordinarily, like I said, we would go so far, kind of making light or taking jabs at somebody like that as a bit of a one-trick pony. But Maron just makes it so real and kind of knows just those right places to touch and just how to touch them, even if it has to sometimes be a little bit rough, so that you do feel it, so that he does go from being somebody that you recognize as being a lousy human being to someone who progressively has to look around him and realize that he's not only capable of more, that he owes it to himself to do more, but that in some instances he all of a sudden has kind of an obligation to others to be a better version of himself. It's something that, again, this is all of a sudden getting really personal here in this show, but it's something that I experienced myself when, the joke around our house is that Ace kind of adopted me, in a manner of speaking. And it's something that I, as someone who always said, jury's out, I could change my mind, but for right now, no, don't want kids. It's something that, to say it threw me for a loop would be putting it extraordinarily mildly. And so I get that. And then kind of once that settles in, much as it does with Sam, you start seeing everything else in a new light. And sometimes when you do that, the people around you are just so used to, so comfortable with who or what they know you as, that it can be a little bit hard for them to accept. It can be a little bit hard for them to swallow. And sometimes the easiest thing for them to do is just to sort of make light of it, to almost taunt somebody for it and be like, ha ha ha, very, very funny. Now do the other thing. Do the other thing we like for you to do so much. That's kind of how it is when he has that. I love that moment when he's on the tennis court.
Oh, that's so great.
Yeah, he's frustrated. Bash has just absolutely eaten his lunch all day, and he goes to do his usual thing where he goes to pull out a cig, and it's like all of that just kind of washes over him.
What I really loved about that particular performance, that whole sequence of events, is he doesn't understand kibitzing. Like, he doesn't understand it. Like, for a Hollywood guy, I actually thought
I don't understand kibitzing. What is kibitzing?
Networking. Like, they're clearly there to hobnob with these producers.
Okay, I see what you mean.
And it's so funny because for like a studio guy, like he's like that's not on the agenda. Like he may understand it, but he definitely comes across as a character who kind of hobnobs and networks at gunpoint. You know, like he just like he's definitely got that like DIY punk rock mentality of I don't fucking want to talk to money people. I just want to go make my art. He's the Dean Ambrose, the John Moxley of filmmaking.
Actually, you know what? I just realized something. I just realized something about something kind of ironic about the fact that this is Mark Maron we're talking about. The name Chris Hardwick is kind of a touchy subject with a lot of people, given the allegations that surfaced about him last year. But, you know, there was a time, and to a certain extent he still is, when he was a bit of a personal inspiration to me because of his very real story of how he pulled himself up by his bootstraps. When before he was one of the most prolific faces in show business, he was just that guy who hosted Singled Out. I remember a number of years ago, I remember what podcast it was. It was on the Nerdist Network. It was Making It with Ricky Lindholm, one half of Garfunkel and Oates. Hardwick was on there, and he was talking about the moment when he decided that he had had his fill of partying. And it was when a particular comic who was very much not very fond of him personally actually approached him at one point after a show, after kind of observing him, and said, look, this might do you some good. It's a little pamphlet. It helped me realize that I had a problem. You might want to give this some thought. The guy who approached Hardwick, Mark Maron. And so now on this show, according from all that Hardwick has described of his days as a struggling addict, as a has-been, it kind of feels like Maron was kind of having his own independently instigated Chris Hardwick moment, where he decides to piece by piece kind of turn things around.
Okay, let's shift now. Let's talk about Ruth. And we can kind of dribble in some of the Sam stuff here because, you know, a large part of her arc this season dealt with Sam.
Sure.
I'm going to make a blanket statement here. We talked about, you know, we just had this whole conversation about Orange is the New Black, and last year we did Weeds and, you know, all of the Weeds series in one podcast, which for those of you listening on Podcoin can go back in our archives and check out. And check out our TV party for Weeds, the series. Anyway, you know, we talked about Genji Cohen, her staple, her gimmick, her thing is detestable women leads. And one of the weird things about Glow was that is that you have two female leads, and she kind of split. Like they're more tolerable, more digestible, Ruth and Debbie, because they don't have all the shitty qualities of Nancy and Piper. She kind of divvied them up between the two characters. So, you know, Ruth has some issues, but I still like her better than Nancy and Piper. And while Debbie started off really detestable, and by the end of season 2, she, you know, you wanted to punch her in the face. This season, I thought they did a really good job of keeping both of them pretty even keel. I personally didn't think either Debbie or Ruth got up until the very end. The very, very moment of the very last episode, which we'll talk about just by itself, where I wanted to throw my phone, of which I was watching the show on, across the room between the two of them. For the most part, you know, they are not nearly in the same ballpark as detestable as either Piper or Nancy. They're actually very toned down, both of them, this season. And very likable with moments of, are you an idiot? But so Ruth, you know, she has two kind of memorable bits for me in this as far as performances. You know, Allison Brie, hell of an actress, no qualms there. But her not a date with Sam, and and leading up to him admitting that he's in love with her and she doesn't love him back, but she really does. She just doesn't know it yet. And her trying to make the thing with the boyfriend work. I thought all of that. Look, I'm not a huge relationship guy on TV as far as, romance goes, but I really enjoyed that. For a weird, bizarre, awkward love triangle type of thing, I thought they pulled that off really well, and it made Ruth an interesting character for me. Boy, have I used the word interesting a lot tonight. Other than that, the other time that I thought this show really threw me for a loop, I didn't see that coming, and I really enjoyed Alison Brie's performance, is when she reads for Justine's movie, and she doesn't get the part, and Sam tells her she doesn't get the part, and she kind of explodes on him, and she's conflicted, and she doesn't know what to do. But the one thing that remains true with this character, which sometimes gets lost in a lot of the wrestling, is no one's going to tell her she's not going to be an actress. No matter how long it takes, no matter what happens, she's going to be an actress, even if she has to cut her own nose off to spite her face. More on that when we talk about the last episode. So what did you think of Alison Brie, the Ruth stuff separate from Sam, the Ruth stuff with Sam?
The Ruth stuff with Sam, they had better play that really, really carefully. Because a relationship like that, it can become the backbone of a series. But on the other hand, man, it's a bit like you're engaging in a street race and you want to make sure that you don't pop that nitrous too soon. You want to make sure that you really commit to that right when you need it to get you across the finish line. Because if you do it too soon, you're just going to be left with nothing to get you that last bit that you need to get you to the finish. At least to get you there as strongly as you could. Good examples of that are, Bones really kind of lost its way about halfway through its run because of the way they all of a sudden chose to make Booth and Brennan's domesticity kind of the focal point of the whole thing. It really made their relationship, frankly, boring and altered them both in ways that made them much less compelling. Another good example would be The Office. I'm not quite as harsh as a lot of people in terms of when that started to go downhill. My oft-mentioned friend Scarlett and I would kind of differ on this a little bit. I seem to recall, I think, that she said once that Pam and Jim's wedding was when the show just all of a sudden passed the point of no return and became hopeless afterward. I beg to differ in that I think it was when they had their first baby. So I feel like it lasted maybe a little bit longer after that.
If I can,
but pretty close.
Chime in here. I watched just enough Friends in its initial run to know that the Ross Rachel thing started off as the backbone, as did the Big Bang Theory with Leonard and Penny. Both of these things started out as as the backbone of those shows. And when they did pull the trigger and they kind of ran the course of those relationships, I feel like both shows kind of struggled to figure, well, what now? And they kind of had to look around at the rest of the cast going, well, what do you guys got? Because we've milked this shit dry. And even though I think Ross and Rachel got back together at some point,
that was how they ended the series. That was kind of the pinnacle of the finale.
I thought she was with Joey at the end.
No, Ross and Rachel ended up together. I'm just about positive Ross and Rachel ended up together at the end of the finale. That's the way I remember it.
You may be right. I know Joey was in there somewhere, and then he went off and did his own spinoff.
I'll tell you. I'll tell you two other shows that really kind of handled this well in their own ways. Cheers. For the longest time, the backbone of the show was Sam and Diane. Shelley Long decided she was really too good for a primetime sitcom. Fucked off to go to go conquer Hollywood, and so instead, along comes Kirstie Alley. They get a number of years more of will they, won't they, cat and mouse between Sam and Rebecca. Ultimately, that doesn't pan out when they decide to get together to first try to have a baby, and then eventually realize they didn't really love each other. And then at a certain point toward the end of the series, Sam kind of comes to grips with his womanizing ways and really grapples with his conscience, and that kind of serendipitously led the way to Shelley Long being reintroduced in the 2-part series finale, and Sam and Diane finally kind of getting their ultimate resolution, which was, no, they don't belong together, and they're at peace with it.
Yeah.
And Sam realizing that he's, in...
The love of his life is the bar.
Well, I was going to say, I was going to invoke one of my favorite Frank Turner lyrics, that he's happy and he's settled with the person he's become.
Yeah.
Another show that really kind of went a fascinating way with it was Scrubs with JD and Elliot. And the fact that they were so on again, off again, that at a certain point they started lampshading it. And actually one of my very favorite moments in the show, I believe, oh God, my good buddy Jeremy Hulsoff, if he's listening right now, he's gonna want to kick me in the head if I get this wrong, but fuck it. I think it was in the very last season when there was an episode when they kind of sort of crafted the whole thing into almost kind of a makeshift fairy tale. And John C. McGinley, Dr. Cox, the author of Your Much Reviled Wrong song, in voiceover, it kind of made the point that these two were actually made for each other and belonged together, but they were just too stupid to see it. And that's kind of where they round out the last season with the fact that at a certain point during the season, they do finally go for it. After all the hit and miss, all the starts and stops, finally they do just kind of quit fighting it and realize, oh yeah, this really is my person. This is who I was meant to be with. But again, you've got to handle that with such a fine brush here, because I mean, we're also talking about a creator who, as we've documented with her first 2 series, is demonstrated to have no idea when to end a show. Her first 2 shows either went on several seasons longer than they should have, or at least several episodes. And so you just have to wonder if they're possibly heading toward catastrophically blowing their load with this way too early.
Well, let me ask you a question, because way too early it could be a relative thing. Netflix has this really nasty habit of just canceling a show. Just fucking canceling it. No rhyme or reason outside of Disney Netflix.
Hey, that's why they're a perfect match with Genji.
So, it's one of those things where it's like, if they don't pull the trigger on Ruth and Sam, I think you're robbing the fans of the show of something that could have been special for the show. If this gets canceled too soon, if let's say they pull the trigger next season, okay, we got it in before, and maybe the show ends at just about where it should. Maybe it goes 8 seasons. If it gets House of Cards, it's Orange is the New Black, and then you might say, it was too soon. You don't know. That's the problem with a show like this and doing it on Netflix, is you really have no idea where you stand a lot of times, unless they come at you early with renewing, and as of yet, the show hasn't been renewed. A lot of times, I don't find this stuff out until good 6 months to a year after the previous season. And then they kind of announce at the same time, yeah, it'll be along next season, you know, next actual season. Like, it'll be along in the fall. That fucking doesn't help me. So I think it, for the writers, they have to have a sense of it happening organically in the story. I think here, Ruth was, you know, they're clearly still playing with the idea of Ruth's first love is the theater. The theater, Sean. And everything else is sort of secondary to that, whether it be people or whatever. And she cuts off her nose. That's her character. She cuts off her nose to spite her face in the service of this one dream that she has, for better or for worse. So I was okay with them kind of dipping their toe in that relationship and then immediately drawing back and causing all kinds of havoc. I'll give you the kind of last word here on Ruth because I jumped in there. But then let's bring on Debbie.
Frankly, I'm fine with where they're going with Ruth, and I'm glad that they didn't try to go whole hog with her and Sam, semi-obvious as it might seem. When it comes to Debbie is more Piper than Nancy, I think. In that, and I'll give you the opportunity to either agree or disagree with me, in that whereas with Nancy, you just kind of see her throwing more fuel on her fires in a misguided effort to, she thinks, put them out. Debbie is a bit more like Piper in that, yeah, she's a hot mess most of the time, but then we see there's moments, those glimmers of hope, where she's seemingly starting to get her shit together. And all of a sudden, we're rooting for her because we're just thinking, damn it, Debbie, we wouldn't be angry if we didn't care.
I'll tell you.
We're pulling for you here. No, stop. Stop digging. Stop digging.
So I don't want to rehash what we've already covered, but whereas I was more sympathetic and interested in the sexuality/gender stuff, and I thought, okay, this is a good place to editorialize and talk about this. Weirdly, on a show that features wrestling, but you know, look, that's always kind of been just the marquee sign to get people to watch. And okay, but we're going to have a show about some issues here. We're going to talk about some things, which is fine. When it came to Debbie and now I'd like to tell you a little something about women empowerment.
Message.
Yeah, we talked about this on the Orange is the New Black show, where some of it comes natural and organic and in service of the story, and I'm okay with it. I honestly, as somebody who reviews a lot of media, I'm pretty much okay with talking about anything, even if it's something that I'm not personally particularly comfortable with. I'm okay seeing in a medium that I enjoy, comics, TVs, movies, etc. As long as it's in service, once again, to the story. Whereas I felt like with Debbie and the women empowerment stuff, this is the exact same thing we talked about on Orange is the New Black Season 7 with immigration, where it was like, I'd like to talk to you about this subject, and my manner in doing so, the argument I'm going to put forward is to hit you in the fucking face with a sledgehammer.
God.
Debbie might as well have been wearing fucking neon green and pointing at her not a crotch. You know, it's just yelling, suck it. I mean, for those of you non-wrestling fans listening, that was a G-Generation X. Look it up on Wikipedia reference. But yeah, I just felt like, whereas the aforementioned sexuality stuff was, I think, believe it or not, a bit more subtle, and I thought deftly handled. I thought the stuff with Debbie and being, men stink, which she actually fucking says at one point. And I get where So the argument might be, well, she got to that place because of having to deal with shitty men in her life, and there's not a whole lot of likable men on this series, which, okay, I get that. And I get the point of view of women experience a whole lot of not likable men in their lives. But could you write it better? Maybe? I'm just asking. Could you handle the subject a little more professionally than hammer to the fucking face? Do you hear what I'm trying to tell you? Stop hitting me, Debbie. That's all I want you. Stop hitting me, Genji. I feel like an abused fucking partner in all of this. Ah! Your thoughts, sir?
Well stated. That part aside, I will say that the way she kind of goes from substance abuse to try to escape the lack of control she has over everything around her, to at one point the barely alluded to eating disorder.
Oh yeah, let me just because you brought it up and you have the floor, but I got to mention that because it was a
Go ahead.
This was a shit issue in terms of how it was handled. Like, you know, eating disorders, a super important thing. I thought that's the direction they were going with her, and a bit tried and a bit hackneyed, I think, at this point. If you want to talk about it on a show like this, I'm fine with it. They fucking, they threw the ball up, and everyone turned their back on it, and the volleyball hit the floor, and it was summarily forgotten about.
Yeah, exactly, because it was something that she was doing, my impression was, as a means of seizing some kind of control. When she realized she couldn't escape through drugs and keep everything together anymore. She instead tries to do it through sex, and then, as it suggested, by binging and purging. And as you said, it goes the way of LaGuerta's crush on Dexter in the first season. It happened, and then we never spoke of the shortcut again. It was something that could have brought so much more out of the character and so much more out of the people around them. And instead, it becomes the white Hummer. It becomes the thing that someone knows Booker T did last summer. It becomes the rising of the briefcase.
It was me, Austin. It was me. Stop hitting me.
Fuck that. That actually got a resolution. It was a stupid resolution.
Oh, good. I'm glad you said it.
But it got an ending.
Sure. We don't know what to do. Vince did it. Terrific. Turn page.
Again, it was moronic, but it was still at least something. It
wasn't GTV.
Yeah, exactly. And that was what this is. It's GTV. And yeah, it's possible that they might decide to pick it up next season and do something with it. But what's the point? You're calling back to a one-off moment at the end of an episode when I was watching it just kind of going, go on. And nothing. Episodes go by, and just not another. They made a bigger deal out of her fucking half the staff at the Fantan.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, I applaud the show for, I think, some fairly good writing. I'm very interested in a lot of. We spent the last hour and a half talking about all these well-written bits in the show, so it makes it that much worse that they pulled a writing blunder as big as introducing something that important and then summarily never addressing it again.
Mm-hmm.
It's the equivalent of, walking into a ballroom dance, dropping your pants, and walking out again, and nobody blinks an eye.
Oh, man. There's a saying that I often bring up on my stream when I'm playing Overwatch, and I can just see a clearly stupid strategy taking place among my team, and I'm trying to object to it, and they're not listening, and it's something I inevitably have to resign myself. and that is, I'll take a bad plan committed to wholeheartedly over a good plan that's half-assed.
Yeah.
In this case, this was something, and that's what this was. This was an actual decent idea that was gone about with no actual commitment to it.
Right. I'll take commitment any day over, whatever. But, so Debbie's whole thing is, she wants power for herself. She's done with all these idiot men, and who can blame her? Who can blame her in the mid-'80s? Just another criticism of that. Well, I'm sure, there was tons of utter crap that women had to deal with in the workplace in the 80s. Some of it's alluded to in this show. I still feel like the way that it was approached and the way that it was written, there was a lot of 2019 bleeding into whatever year this is in the 80s. Mm-hmm. It was like, come on. I watch Harlots on Hulu when new episodes drop, and it would be like, somebody... Actually, the best example of this, The History of the World Part 1 by Mel Brooks, where they're showing you a busy street in Rome, and there's one black guy that crosses the path. He's got a boombox on his shoulder. It just felt like that. Like,
it's kind of funny because when the whole thing started with Britannica and her migraine, rather than it just being an incidental storyline and a kind of just a brief slice of life episode in which we kind of confront the fact that Bash is just flying blind here in terms of relationships and how to actually care for somebody. Where I actually kind of thought they were going with it? I thought they were about to turn it into a consequences of concussions storyline.
Would have been interesting, but I think that's reflective of your 2019 is bleeding too much into my 1985.
Well, no, and that's exactly my point. Is I didn't know if I was excited about that possibility or not, because if you're to do it 2019 by way of the mid-'80s, they were going to insert somebody who was all of a sudden terribly concerned about how many concussions she was suffering. And can't you see this is so obviously bad for you? Whereas, come on, Mark, you and I have been professional wrestling aficionados long enough to know that this was the peak era for a concussion just kind of being little more than, you got your bell rung. Take an aspirin and shake. Right. Take an aspirin, some smelling salts, and shake it off. Hey, nobody back then gave a shit about concussions.
No, you got a concussion. It was like, shake it off, pussy.
You nowadays, you have a combination of old timers now who will either say something of, current generation's a bunch of pussies. They just can't take it like we could. And of course, some of them 5 minutes later probably can't remember who they are or where they are.
Yeah, all those people died in their 50s, Sean.
But on the other hand, the other ones you've got are the ones who flat out say sometimes something to the effect of, if I'd known then what we knew now,
right, I
would have gotten out a lot sooner than I did. Sure. I might have never gotten into the business.
That was funny. And I don't want to get too sidetracked. I want to get back to wrapping up the show here. But I just remember at the end of, I think, one of the Brock Lesnar fights, might have been the Brock Lesnar Shane Carwin, the Undertaker was in the audience, and Ariel Helwani asked him, like, hey, if you could have gotten into MMA instead of wrestling, if you'd been born at a different time and you had the option of either one, which one would you have done? And the Undertaker all but punches Ariel Helwani and says, what do you think I would have done, dummy? The odds of you getting... I mean, MMA looks brutal, and certainly my father-in-law will tell you it's the most barbaric thing just outside of boxing. But I would, compare longitudinal career injuries of the average wrestler versus the average MMA fighter, I would have to guess the wrestler suffers the greater degree of injuries. The cumulative over the years. I mean, you fight an MMA fighter fights maybe 2-3 times a year at best. Wrestling you're doing it almost every day. But so wrapping up here with Debbie and Ruth. I don't have a whole lot left to say. I want to talk about the last episode because last season we talked about the throwaway episode being the one where they just showed the TV show, and this is one I kind of nodded off during, and you and I both was like, did they not have enough content to fill a whole season? What the fuck is this? I'm not going to say the season finale was that bad, but so much of it was A Christmas Carol. And it's saved by the fact that their iteration of A Christmas Carol, one is all in storyline is saved by the fact that this is supposed to be a Vegas show and not an actual pro wrestling event. So there's a lot of forgiveness there in how silly this got. But also, I actually was highly amused by it. I mentioned before that Carmen, who she plays the ghost of Christmas Future, and she kind of does it like the Undertaker. That's what I was getting at before.
I gotcha.
Where she's doing a better Undertaker now than he's doing, because he's just kind of out there like, well, Vince signed me to a contract till I'm dead, so roll me out there when you need me in Saudi Arabia. Meanwhile, you have this character who is doing all the good Undertaker stuff in her interactions with Ruth as Zoya in the Christmas Carol, and it's just fucking great. Like, as a wrestling fan, Sean Garmer mentioned this before, like, wrestling fans are not going to get a whole lot of wrestling this season, because that's really not the intention of the show. But for those that tune in for the wrestling, this was a lot of fun stuff. I enjoyed the Christmas Carol stuff because it was so over the top, and then Carmen does such a great version of the Undertaker / Ghost of Christmas Future. My one neckbeard nitpick at this is I wish she had choke slammed Zoya instead of hip tossing or body slamming or whatever move she did. I just kind of took the air out of that moment for me.
Okay, you want to talk about 2019 by way of the mid 80s? That's kind of what you're talking about. What you have to remember,
you think
the choke slam was not exactly a commonplace move at that point.
I'll give you that. I mean, the Undertaker shows up in, I guess, the early 90s?
I think by the time he came to the WWF, he had been around the business for a few years, but he hadn't really made his name. And keep in mind, we're talking about this takes place in, WrestleMania 1 has happened. So we'd be talking about 1985, 1986, something like that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Sid Vicious was not a big name by this point. He was another big one who used the choke slam. The guys we think we most commonly associate with that move, I mean, the closest I can think of that we would see to it would be you would sometimes see big guys doing like a double-handed choke. Mm-hmm. Like you would see Andre doing that sometimes.
All right, so I have his wiki up. He debuted in the WWE as Kane the Undertaker in 1990. So you're right. Yeah. It would have been a little anachronistic to.
Yeah, it would have been very anachronistic. And some of the moves they were doing here are
the fucking moonsaults.
Yeah, a lot of this was shit that I'm not even sure junior heavyweights over in Japan or luchadors in Mexico were using at that point.
Right. Weirdly, I would have been okay with it though. I know what you're.
Which by the way, one little nod here. Bong Michaels.
No clue.
Mark, Bubby, what first name kinda sorta rhymes with bong? Or it's at least alliterative to it? If we're talking about anachronism.
Here's the thing. I'm not really sure what you're referring to. So just
there's a
take me there.
there's a moment in Outward Bound where the biddies are packing their stuff up, and they mention grab that. We can't leave Bong Michaels behind.
I forgot about that. It was such a throwaway line. I don't even care.
Bong Michaels.
Sure, why not?
I'm pretty sure that in 1985 or 1986, he was still a wiry youngster getting his ass handed to him by Jose Lothario.
I'm gonna forgive certain allowances here. I'm just that's what I'm saying. Like you're not wrong. I'm making the argument that let's not be anachronistic in our storytelling. But I'm making allowances for it in just the wrestling. Give me that much. Fine.
Anyway, God, and now I've lost track of what our topic even was.
We're talking about here. I'll knit this all together, and then I'll give you the last word on it, and then we'll start to wrap.
Okay.
So I brought up the Christmas Carol. Which, you tell me if you thought, if you were pulling your hair out or not about that. But I also want to address how the episode ends. So let me get all this out at once, and then you can address it.
Do the summary, yeah.
So at the end of the episode, at this point, Bash and Debbie have decided they're going to buy the network out from her boyfriend, Tex, who I love this actor. I saw him in Carnival. I just binged that over the summer. Great actor. I thought he was excellent. I enjoyed his character on this season of Glow. Anyway, they're going to screw him and buy the TV station out from under him. And this is sort of goes to Debbie's I don't need no men around kind of a thing. So anyway, Bash is going to buy it for her, and she's going to be president, and they're going to have an understanding. Terrific. Lobster. She's going to then keep Glow on the air. She's going to put it on the network, and she wants Ruth to direct, and she wants Carmen to not leave. Carmen at this point has already made up her mind, not knowing any of this, but if they're going to continue to do a Vegas show, she wants no part of it. She wants to go do wrestling, and she does not know what Debbie has planned, and Debbie can't tell her, so she fucks off. We'll see what happens in season 4 if there is one. But the real interplay here, the real thing, and this drove me nuts because between the two of them, I'm like, the writing itself didn't bother me. It was the character choice, in that Debbie can't say anything, or she's gonna end up narfing the deal. But she can't. But she thinks it's such a great thing, she can't hold back anymore. So she tells Ruth all of what I just explained, and then says, "I want you to direct." And Ruth is like mulling it over and struggling with it. And then Debbie takes it a step too far, as if she doesn't know who this fucking woman is standing in front of her, and says, "If you were going to be an actress, it would have happened by now." Well, you've just now taken this woman who will defiantly do the exact opposite of whatever it is you said. So that's her character, and these are supposed to be like lifelong best friends. Like, if you're writing this character, Debbie, as to she doesn't know when to stop, okay, that makes sense. But it was such an asinine thing to say. And then there's Ruth, who's an asshole. and as I said a couple times now throughout the podcast, her first love is the theater, and she will not give this up. She'll cut off her nose to spite her own face. And she goes and she tells her, I do not accept your premise. I will be an actress if it kills me, and I will turn down this perfectly good offer that she could have used to to further her career. It's something I talk to my kids about all the time. It's like you sometimes have to make compromises in life. Things are not always going to be handed to you perfectly the way you want them, and you have to know when to pick your battles. And
Debbie kind of talks herself right out of the sale.
Yeah, exactly.
And actually, who that reminds me of? Reminds me of when Bash is trying to get Sam on board, and he's actually kind of got him on the hook. and he decides that the ideal negotiation strategy is to entirely demean Sam's lifetime body of work.
Right. Now that I've punched you in the eye, what do you think of the scar, huh? Huh?
It's just, I don't think anyone has taught these people how negotiation is supposed to work.
How to interact with a human being. Granted, my kids are 8 and 5, and this might be a little too high for them. But I've often said to them, for fuck's sake, learn to read a room. Pay attention to what's around you. Have some conversational and body awareness. There's 2 little hurricanes. But that's the thing. Like, they're 8 and 5. They're it's more or less acceptable as they're learning. They're becoming. Here you have 2 grown ass adults and middle aged, maybe a little younger than that for Ruth. And it's like, for fuck's sake, neither one of you know how to read a room, know how to read a person, have any clue what's going on. This is like the Genji Cohen special. What's this? Tell me in one sentence what this character's about. Head straight up her ass. All right.
It's just, and again, it's to kind of bring it all back around full circle, so we can hopefully kind of wrap this up. The show, Debbie in particular, is fast becoming about people who cannot get out of their own way.
Yeah.
If we're gonna kind of boil this down to true professional wrestling examples, everybody on this show is either Kid Cash or Austin Aries. Austin Aries in particular, because his biggest weakness, it's not his size, it's not his work rate, it's not his promos. It is the fact that Austin Aries never has any idea exactly when to shut the fuck up.
Yeah.
And again, Kid Cash, maybe not as familiar to most people. If you go and look at his history with a lot of promotions, exactly the same way. All the talent in the world. But, my God, until Austin came along, I'd never seen somebody so adept at talking himself out of a push.
Shane Douglas.
Oh, God, Shane's pretty damn close. Although, in Shane's case, I always like to chalk it up a little bit more to the assertion that he was world championship material in ECW, and in the other major promotions he worked in, he was at best a middle of the road, maybe Intercontinental or Television champion.
Yeah.
And not even a particularly memorable one. Hell, in the case of, and yeah, this is one that I will actually kind of lend some support to. In the case of his brief second WWF tenure as Dean Douglas, yeah, he could have maybe been something until he decided he was going to spout off at the Click. And it's to paraphrase one of my favorite lines from Sin City by Alexis Bledel. Oh, darling, you just went and did the dumbest thing of your whole entire life. That's exactly how he ended up becoming a middle of the road, forgettable ECW. Well, correction, yeah, a memorable ECW world champion and a very mid-card WCW champion. He threatened to stretch Shawn Michaels. Of all the fucking people.
Yeah, Debbie is definitely quickly becoming, one of those types that we're talking about, where she I keep saying that Ruth is the one cutting off her nose to spite her face. Now that we've sort of gone in this direction, that's Debbie's problem too.
Well, hell, look, go back to the whole thing where she breaks Ruth's ankle. I pointed this out to Carrie when she was watching with me for the first time. We were watching the recap. I've just started introducing her to professional wrestling gradually. I said, okay, I paused to say this, okay, one thing to point out. Had this been a true, genuine wrestling promotion and had Ruth gone and pulled a stunt like that, there would have been the mother of all receipts.
You mean Debbie?
Debbie, yes. Had Debbie gone and done that shit in one of the real like glory days territories, oh my God, the mother of all receipts would have come down on her from somebody. That was where you would have gotten shit like Vern Gagne offering to pay the Iron Sheik to break Hogan's leg. You know, or in more modern terms, you know, Daniel Puder decides that his smell like roses, and so we're gonna put him in the Royal Rumble and sequentially stick him in there with Chris Benoit, Eddie Guerrero, and finally Bob fucking Holly. You barked up the wrong tree, the tree fell on you. In this case, there's no such system of frontier justice, and so Debbie kind of gets off scot-free with just, you know, having one big verbal knockdown, drag out with Ruth in the hospital, and that's that. But even beyond that, even when she kind of gets the get out of jail free card, she just can't stop landing on go to jail, go directly to jail. do not pass go, do not fuck a valet, do not snort enough coke to kill Red Fox. Do not hork up your burger and milkshake.
So
I think we've said about. I think
I'm going right to the exit here. So all in all,
it's time to go home.
Yeah, pay me. Yeah, I think season 3 is probably their best season yet. I know for a lot of people it was mixed. You know, not, as we said before, not enough wrestling. You know, troubled with the issues, that sort of thing. I actually think this, outside of some of the knocks that we talked about, this is some of the best writing of the season so far. I think they've now firmly established the world and the characters, and they finally gave the other characters some stuff to play with. I feel like we've got our first fully formed season, where I don't have a tremendous amount of complaints outside of the stuff I've already voiced. So I'm anxious for a season 4. It hasn't been renewed yet. We'll see what happens. I don't know how well it does on Netflix or how much this stuff costs to produce. But Orange is the New Black is done, and I don't know what else is on Genji Cohen's plate. So, you know, hopefully her and Netflix can work out, another season or two before we call it a day. With that said, Sean, just 50 words or less. Any last words here? If not, we'll jump into plugs.
You know what? For once, my conclusion really is fairly brief. This season impressed me more than anything else for one very big reason. I could get frustrated about this and look at how strong it was and so many things she does right and throw my hands up in the air and say, Genji, where was this in the latter season of Weeds? And at least half of Orange is the New Black. But I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to look at this and say, this is growth. This is learning and maturing and evolving in some extremely positive ways. And I certainly hope this gets at least another season or two to wrap things up. Because this may be some of the best work she's done since, the first 2 or 3 seasons of the aforementioned shows.
All right. With that being said, Sean, quick tell people about your streams and your memes and your beams. I got referred to as the living meme. I want you to know that.
The living meme?
Yes. Someone referred to me as the living meme, and another person referred to me, and this is directly related to our SummerSlam review, as the rude guy. I am gleefully embracing both names.
You and I have very different approaches. In the words of Abed Nadir from Community, I like liking things. You, on the other hand, you are more often than not very blunt. when something earns your displeasure.
I have been told that, and I am embracing it.
And as far as living meme, buddy, I will stack my kiddo and her boyfriend up against you any day
for
that title.
It's not a competition. Go ahead and do your plugs.
Okay. If you want to hear more of my various rantings, lately seeming to center on a weird combination of DDP yoga, video games, especially Overwatch and Overwatch League, and my numerous creative endeavors, please go follow me over at Comer Codex, ComerCodex. I'm on there really quite a bit. In fact, I've been on there kind of catching up on DMs and tweets even while I've been on the show. Otherwise, you can also catch me at twitch.tv/Comer Codex. Everything's kind of branded now. I'm on there Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. Best to check Twitter for exactly when I'm going to be on. That's sometimes a bit flexible. I play a lot of competitive and PvP games, especially Overwatch and Dead by Daylight. And most recently, due to events within my family that I'm not going to go into at length here on the air, I've decided that I'm going to start gearing my streams towards trying to raise money for the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network. So if nothing else, if you go to my Twitter account, right next to my username, you will see a link complete with the request, help stop sexual violence. That is my RAIN donation page. Please go to it, and I would urge you, if you happen to have at least $1 or $2 in your pocket, maybe at least a day or two per week, forego your coffee, forego a soda, skip a candy bar, and give a couple bucks to an extremely worthy cause that is near and extremely dear to mine and my family's heart. I may very well be streaming a little bit late tonight. I had wanted to get one in, and I need to unwind for a little bit. So go over, follow now, and I'll tweet when I'm ready to go live, probably sometime between 11 and midnight Central Time.
Yeah, we ran a little long tonight. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
All right. As for me, tomorrow we have our Super Blog team up, the last watch along that we're going to be doing before all the movie related watch alongs or trailer reactions head over to Patreon exclusive. This will be the last one we're doing that's up for general consumption because it's part of the Super Blog team up. Myself, David Wright, and Jesse Starcher will be watching Jupiter Ascending. We've got 2 shows on Saturday. We've got a TV party for Lost in Space. Boy, after a couple episodes, did that suck me in. Oh, doggy. And then UFC 241 is that night. Robert Winfrey is going to attempt to do written coverage and do alternate commentary with me. I'm sure it'll end with him having some sort of stroke and having to be wheeled out of his house.
Like you do.
Like you do. So this coming week here on the Radulich Broadcasting Network, it's all Swamp Thing all the time. We've got Saga of the Swamp Thing Volume 1 by Alan Moore on source material. Tune in for that. There's a very funny gag reel at the end featuring some fun we had with Alan Moore and his frustrations with DC Comics. So give that a listen, even if you just listen to the gag reel. Though the whole show is good. I swear is it. We'll be doing a TV party tonight for the Swamp Thing series on DC Universe. We'll be reviewing The Art is Murder, Human Target on the Metal Hammer of Doom. Sean's last show of this month. I'm sure he's just about done with this whole thing. The last contracted obligation for the month of August. Then I can leave him alone for a few weeks. We'll be doing an on trial for Swamp Thing from 1982 with Adrienne Barbeau. Damn it. The way the calendar and my mouse don't like each other. I keep having.
Well, while you're working that out, let me tell you something, Gene Mean. To be honest with you, I have been loving podcasting. I've always enjoyed it, but I've been loving it more lately than I think I ever have. So by all means, man, I am not sick of it. I'm only starting to kind of get myself into high gear.
I'm happy to hear that. We got a Swamp Thing 1982 on trial. Sean will be prosecuting. I'll be defending. My main defense will be Adrian Barbeau stabbed in the boob. It's fantastic. No,
Enough said.
Enough said. Myself, Jesse Starcher, and Al motherfucking Sedano will be reviewing Good Omens from Amazon Prime on Friday, and then Saturday, Rob Winfrey had a night off from doing UFC coverage, so I twisted his arm, gave him a noogie, pantsed him, and said, "You're doing boxing coverage with me." Sergey Kovalev and Anthony Yard for the WBO light heavyweight title. We might have a double shot if I can get Victor Cremato of the All About Life podcast to sit in the commentary chair. We'll be doing Figueroa versus Chacon on Fox Sports 1. Finally, we've got Screaming Boy podcast, which will be a Patreon exclusive. We'll be looking at D23. And then to round out our August coverage, we've got DC First, Superman Lobo, Krypton Season 2, Rage of Light Imploder, the Banana Splits sci-fi horror movie. Myself and Alexis Hano will be talking about that. The next night, because Jason Teasley made me, we will be doing a TV party for Zombie fucking Tidal Wave. And then, lastly, our last show of the month, because why not do 7 days straight of podcasting? Myself and Pat Mullen will be doing a review of NXT UK TakeOver Cardiff, just in time for that to end, and you to watch AEW. I'm all the way out. Zip. All right, so that about wraps it. I have done that joke so many times this month, and maybe part of even July. With that said, with my Hackney bits out of the way, thank you for tuning into this extended review. I think this review was longer than the actual show. Review of Glow Season 3. For the love of God, people, be well, be safe, and behave.